Welcome to the Bikeshed Podcast, where we talk about all things software engineering, tech treats, and opinions that will change in 24 hours. I'm your co-host, a man who says please and thank you to AI, Scott K. And alongside with me are my co-hosts. He once refactored a repo so hard it checked itself in to therapy, Matt Hamlin. And my other co-host, with takes so spicy, they're seasoned to perfection, Dillon, Spicy Take Curry. Gentlemen, what are we cooking up today?
I like how you outed yourself as wasting so many tokens in your AI usage, Scott. Like you wasted on please and thank you.
Yep. They say don't do that.
How many millions per day or something was OpenAI burning through just on ChatGPT saying thank you? It's like a couple million or something a day, I think.
I don't remember the number. I just remember the article. I don't explicitly type thank you as its own message. I'm not that crazy.
You're kind of towing the line between being overly generous and like maybe not being mean to it. So when they do have an uprising, you're not first in line to.
I'm semi-considerate. Morally gray.
This is the first time we've gotten together to record. I think maybe at least 2.5 months, maybe 3 months. It's been we had our good our summer break. Now we're entering into season 2. We had a podcast I think lined up, but I think we haven't wrapped it up or finished editing it. So this might be I don't know. It might be a little bit rusty. I don't know if I can pick up the podcasting hat and put it on again as efficiently as it was a couple months ago.
Yeah, it wasn't 3 months. We released one in June.
Well, we recorded in May.
That last. Oh, was that in May? We were recording them before. Are you sure? I'll tell you right now.
I think so. We did record one in June, but we haven't released it. It's been sitting on the back burner.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Maybe it was a good topic. I don't know. We'll save that for the vault. In 50 years, like Disney does, we'll release a vault of unreleased content, and it'll be there.
We can release it. Let me find it. And I don't even know where it is.
Well, now we have to save it for the vault, Scott. We got to tease it out and get people in the subscriptions and whatnot.
The vault. Dillon, what were you saying?
I don't even know. I feel like we haven't done this in so long that I forgot how. Like, yeah, you're gonna have to teach me how to talk.
All right, I think our main topic today is that we want to cover at least is around. Well, we were having this sort of friendly debate banter around how much should you optimize your deployment pipeline. And Scott, jump in if I'm like sort of mischaracterizing this topic.
I still think you're mischaracterizing it already.
Perfect. All right,
go ahead. Then. No, you go ahead.
Well, okay. All right, my perspective of it was that we were talking about like teams, depending on size, scale, capacity, whatever, shouldn't overly optimize their deployment pipeline beyond a certain point, right? They should like sort of hit a happy medium or whatever, maybe medium is the wrong word, but like sort of a good enough place, and then care more about other things than just how fast they're deploying their changes. And again, maybe I'm like, maybe I'm not painting the right picture there.
No, that's kind of close, but like it's more so in my eyes. There are other things that need to be optimized. There are other work. So this all stemmed from a conversation we were having in our Discord group where a certain company wants to get their deploys to 5 minutes. I have worked at this company and I know about a lot of the problems there. And my hot take here is that deploying in 5 minutes kind of sacrifices a lot of other stability potential metrics, and it's masking a lot of other problems that this company has. And it's kind of a Band-Aid solution to try to solve problems. So you're not solving the problem itself, but rather like a symptom. So
we're talking about here is bleep pair.
I think it's great if you want to optimize pipelines as far as you can, but I think you should do 80% of the work and not that 20% that takes 80% of the time sometimes. Like on a team that owns so much, uh, being so pigeonholed on these pipelines need to be 5 minutes. I think that's a great overarching goal, but not something you should. It's putting the cart before the horse, and investing like all your eggs in that basket is not like the end all be all metric that will do things. We'll get a little bit more into some specifics, but yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Matt.
I was gonna say let's just quickly step back for folks that maybe aren't familiar with the topic or with the discussion. So if you're running a company that primarily has a web presence, like a website, you end up needing to deploy that website, and you frequently those companies deploy often, multiple times a day. So you code up some changes and you want to release it to your customers. Usually that process is like goes through a continuous deployment pipeline. There's companies that don't do continuous deployment; they sort of make scheduled releases. That you kind of see those in companies where maybe your bank has like a little banner saying that they expect downtime, probably because they're doing a big release. But for companies that don't do that, they usually deploy frequently, multiple times a day, or multiple times a week. Right? That deployment process is just like building that code and then putting it onto servers that customers interact with. So when we talk about deployment times, deployment lifecycle is like sort of what's the time it takes for an engineer to basically check in their code, make a change, and then sort of push it up, and then have that code be built and then released to customers. Maybe that's like sort of glossing over the details. Like there's a lot of different metrics within that, but that's like the rough concept for people that aren't tightly familiar with the whole life cycle.
Great point. And I think that view can even be challenged. But I want to also uh, we're talking about like corporation level companies that take in a lot of money using their platform every day. So we're not talking about your personal website or maybe even a small business startup app that you need to iterate really quickly to stay ahead of the game, to show that you're building new features to get money and funding. We're talking about already established sites that have a lot of marketing behind them, and um, are they executing? They're taking in a lot of money. So at that point, like, what is the execution work? They're already established for what they're building and what their brand is. Now we want to weigh and balance between churning out features and making sure it's stable.
What's the
Yeah.
like biggest reason to want to deploy or deploy within 5 minutes anyways? I don't think we've
Great
touched on that.
question.
So my take here is less like 5 minutes is sort of just a number that we were talking about maybe in that discussion at that time. My take is that you should continuously push for faster and faster deploy times. So and the reasoning being that the faster you can release a change, the faster you can fix a bug, and the faster you can iterate on your product, right? Like if for example it took you a day, 24 hours, right? You merged some changes and it took 24 hours until that change was seen by customers. Your cycle for fixing a bug, one is like, okay, it takes a little bit to debug, like what is happening, what is the bug, and then a whole day to actually fix it, right? Which might cost companies a decent amount of money. Um, and but the same with like iterating on your feature. Like it takes 24 hours just to like learn from a change that you might make and see how it impacts your customer behavior, right? Again, 24 hours is a big stretch, right? Like most CI or CD pipelines are probably a lot faster. But I think it's just like the faster and faster you make that, right? The sooner you can start to iterate on your changes and release them and get feedback on them. So that's like 5 minutes, again, magic number pulled out of a hat. It's more so just like keep pushing it to make it even faster so that you can get those learnings sooner on those changes. So that's like the core driving.
When you say
Yeah.
keep pushing it, my mind goes to who? Is it like the engineers that are working in that repo that has those pipelines? Or is it like some other team within the company that's like helping do DevX or DevOps for the team? That's kind of organizational structure, but it's interesting to me because
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I just want to focus on the features. What am I doing?
Yeah. This is where I probably maybe branch out to the broader topic that I had originally brought to us to discuss. And so maybe we'll just talk a little bit briefly about it, but then dig back into it. My broad sort of thought is that like the entire company should be set up in such a way that it moves as fast as possible in the right direction. So I call this like organizational velocity or like high organizational velocity, meaning like everything you should do, you should be thinking about how can we do this faster and ensure that we're doing it as fast as possible in the right direction, right? So like that means in my mindset, at least, like, if you're a developer that's maintaining just a little feature on the site, like even your responsibility at that point is still like, how do I iterate on this feature as fast as possible to get those learnings in order to move in the right direction and like keep that pace, right? So like I think it's like sort of a responsibility of everyone to try to do that. And I think that's just like that should be like sort of a universal truth, or like sort of a value number 0 of your company, of like you move as fast as possible in the right direction. I think that just sort of delivers on even outside of deployment and learning from your customers. It's like just delivers on like internally you can make decisions faster if you're cut meetings to 15 minutes or something instead of an hour or whatever, right? Like there's a number of other things outside of deployment where it could touch on, but I think it's sort of, if you start with that as a first principle, then sort of it gets into deployment and say, okay, yeah, deployment, we want to iterate as fast as possible on our product. And I think if you start with that as like a initial founding sort of a value 0 or whatever of your company, then like everything else sort of follows of like, if you're iterating fast, you can learn fast, you can build things that maybe your competitors aren't able to do at the same time. So that's, again, that's like the broad picture I had, but like we can zoom back down into deployment and like, to your question, Dillon, it's like, I sort of see it as like anyone's responsibility. Like if you are participating in that part of the ecosystem, like I wouldn't expect someone from sales to come in and say, oh, let me like fix this deployment pipeline to make it faster. But I would expect everyone to have a vested interest that is deploying or using that process to try to improve it. Again, that's not, I'm not saying that someone that, let's say, works on backend should spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make front end builds even faster, right? It's like contribute to the part but yeah. I'm sure there's like some flaws that we can pick at that thinking. But,
I agree with you. Like this is something that when I see engineers having headaches with it, usually tend to just like jump on it and see like what can I do to find new ways to speed this up. Is there like inefficiencies in our pipelines that are like low hanging fruit? And maybe I'll try to fix it, but also just like raise it to the org and be like, does anyone have any ideas on how we can improve this? Because it's causing headache. It's especially when it's causing headaches. I think when the pipelines get to a speed where people aren't complaining, that's like a good spot to be. But also, it could be the inverse of like people aren't complaining because they're used to it, which is also bad. So
yeah, I mean, I think, well, like the three of us have moved on from that company, Bleep Fair, as our friendly podcast neighbors call it, and we probably maybe, yeah,
you gotta get an actual beep.
Yeah, or we're gonna get a cease and desist from One Time Rundown for using their term. No, but I think like we've moved on to other companies, and maybe we've seen similar sort of, maybe I don't know, the way I internalize it is like sort of whiplash of like seeing like, okay, how slow is the process here at HubSpot, for example, or maybe Scott, you can talk about like deploys at Airbnb, right, compared to where we had it at the previous company, and just say like, oh, actually everyone else around us, or at least okay, I'll speak for myself. Everyone else around me is like, that's just how it works, right? We've sort of become accustomed to it, and it's like that's the speed it runs at. That it would be great if it runs faster, but it's like people are just sort of like, yeah, that's okay. Whereas like I think that's maybe the wrong sort of default mindset. Like maybe the default mindset is how can you make that faster? How can you improve it? Because I think it'll just have like a huge return on investment. So like I think it's like risky to get I don't know, to like sort of sit back and like say, yep, that's good enough. I think that's like a, high risk sort of place to be in.
Yeah, I agree with all these points. So this is where I'm saying like, we're talking about a little bit of a more nuanced problem with the deploys. Basically, like, I agree with organizational velocity. I think we need to, I've always said this, even when I was at Wayfair, I remember we built like I built that toolbar. No one knew how to use like an internal toolbar. And my argument then was like, if developers don't have the tools and can't use them as fast as possible, how can they be successful, right? I think speed is incredibly important. I always see that same side. Um, Speaking for like some things at Airbnb, I think like the site deploys are like 24 hours. And I don't think that that's the right answer either. Like I'm not saying like things need to be super slow. So I agree with both of you. We should optimize CI speed. If we see low-hanging fruit like Dillon said, we should be trying to make it better. We shouldn't like just accept that the process takes a long time and then that's it. But the problem here is like as folks know, if we make our deployment speed really short, there's less process and rigorous testing that's going on. Like you brought it up in our thread map, but like you might, as you add end-to-end testing, you slow down those speeds. And at some point, adding that end-to-end testing is likely on a site this big, it's more valuable for stability than it is to just be able to yeet it out in 5 minutes. It's also like being able to do things really fast in an environment where folks don't work together or aren't working towards the same common goal isn't a replacement for getting things out. And again, 5 minutes is an extreme, but this is the extreme that people were talking about. Like 30 minutes, I wouldn't be complaining about, or maybe even 15 minutes. But it's the effort to get to 5 minutes. Now code is going out so fast that how are we supposed to know that if you have hundreds of engineers, how are we supposed to know what affects what when doing tests against things? So you don't have canary processes. You don't have a lot of end-to-end tests to cover things. Said monitors might not be that great. I don't know how they are now, but like, do you even have monitors to catch things? And I think another thing they brought up was, oh, it's low-level UI. Well, low-level UI could mean a click handler that takes you to the checkout page, and now your target audience doesn't know how to get to the checkout page, and you don't see that right away. These are things that could happen that are risks as opposed to having stability at a site that size. It's different again when it's a smaller organization. And if you could have end-to-end testing that covers everything, and you could have all of these things in place to cover these quote low-level deploys, and it still happened in 5 minutes, I think that's great. But I don't think that's realistic. And more realistic is like, what is the balance that we need to have to make sure we don't introduce a mistake? And another thing I think that like Wayfair used to have, doesn't have today, is a staging environment. So a lot of this to me is a symptom that they're trying to mask, that they're like, well, we can't trust dev, so we just put it out in prod as fast as possible. And if deploys are 5 minutes, we can have confidence faster. And to me, that's not correct at all. That's where I was saying we're masking the symptom to the real problem, and that's confidence in deploys. Like if you created a staging environment that actually reproduced production, or maybe it's an ephemeral environment that shows you what you need, and you could just say that is 100% confidence there, then maybe it doesn't need to be in production in 5 minutes. And I guess that's like my whole argument here, is just that there's some level of like, we have 100% confidence, or maybe that's not realistic either, 90, 98, 95% confidence that this change is going to impact as we see, versus like, we got this thing out in 5 minutes. Now what's the next thing we're doing? In an organization that's not talking to each other and saying like, how does this actually impact what other teams are building? So there are trade-offs here, and I think there's a balance. I think we need speed. I agree with the velocity, especially as an organization. But like at the cost of confidence and stability in what we're doing, I think is the wrong trade-off.
I think I maybe fundamentally disagree that it's like, I think that's a false equivalence or false dichotomy. I'm not sure on the exact terming, but like, I don't think it's a trade-off between speed and stability. I think you can have both. I would argue that you can have both. Like, right, like in the same way that you can speed up your CI pipelines, you can speed up your test runs, right? Like maybe it means digging into, I don't know, contributing to Jest, for example, if you're using Jest for unit tests, like how do you speed up Jest, or like swapping out Jest for something that's faster, right? Like I think you can certainly still have your high confidence that you're deploying the right thing, and also still deploy fast. So I think that's like a false trade-off of like you can't I don't think you need to sacrifice stability in order to move faster. I think, or like moves like sacrifice speed in order to like have more confidence. I think that's the wrong.
But that's not what I'm saying, because I'm telling you that some level, like a canary deployment takes time. It's basically what decides whether or not to promote it. So if you have canary in, you have now slowed down your deployment speed. Like what you're calling, it's in production and done. And that is my point. Not that like we can't optimize for speed. I keep saying that like optimizing for speed is great, but when you're optimizing for speed to mask symptoms of other problems, that is not correct. So we should have a rigorous staging environment. Maybe your staging environment requires you to look at it in staging before it moves to a promoted to canary. And maybe canary deploys last 20 to 30 minutes. You now have, at shortest, a 35-minute full-on deploy.
Why does it take 20 to 30 minutes? You can validate changes in a minute, right? Like why?
If you think you can validate a canary deploy in 1 minute that it causes no problems, then sure. But I still don't think like 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a resume builder point. It's like, oh, we got things to 5 minutes. It takes time to keep things at 5 minutes as it grows, especially at a large scale. So locking into this like almost zero deployment speed, I think is the wrong basis. Like sure. And again, I agree with you. If we want to have these as fast as possible, that's great. But we should be working on getting to that 80% and actually making sure we're making the right changes and they're stable in the right places. Because you're introducing more risk by shortening these things. Even if you say you have a 1 minute canary, like it doesn't guarantee that it's reasoned out any problems that might come by. Like having a longer canary canary deployment helps with confidence. And maybe you don't need 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe you only need 2 minutes, but you need to actually build out these mechanisms as opposed to our deploys happen in 5 minutes.
Yeah. One thing I'll add is like if you're deploying in 5 minutes, you still want to like test your changes in production manually always, right? And maybe somebody else wants to do that too because it's some change they care about. But if everyone's deploying in 5 minutes and over an hour, there's like many deploys, and problems start to happen, you don't know like if it's your change that's causing the problem or some new change that's been introduced in the last hour. So it's you kind of run into the same problem of like a deployed train shooting out 10 different things. They didn't all happen all at once, but they're starting to happen 5-minute increments. So I don't know. I can see where Scott's coming from in terms of like introducing risk because you're shipping too quickly.
Well, also, we talked about this other thing. There are other mechanisms like feature flags that we should be shipping these things behind. We didn't talk about yet. I was expecting you to say that being able to deploy in 5 minutes, we can roll back in 5 minutes. That's great, but we also should be shipping new features behind feature flags. And we should be able to accurately A/B test. If we do have this many developers shipping things in 5 minutes, how do we start to know the impact of what features are impacting what in these types of environments? It becomes more and more difficult.
I think so. I guess like two thoughts. One quick aside though, like for folks that don't know, canary deployments is essentially a process in which you release some changes to a small subset of production and you validate that things are looking good there, right? Like you say, like, okay, I'm going to take 5% of our production traffic, people that visit our experience, and send them to this new version and see how things are going, like monitor metrics, speed, whatever else you care about. And then once you say, okay, that looks good, then finish the rollout to the other 95%, or 5% just being an example. It could be any percentage slice that you want to do for Canary. I think we're maybe getting too locked into how we did deploys at Wayfair, or like how deploys work in the current state versus rethinking how can we do deploys in such a way that it unlocks these speed things, right? I'm thinking from the lens of like, we don't need to be locked into how we did deploys, or like even like Dillon, you were kind of talking about like this sort of default sort of staggering release process where it's like one change, wait 5 minutes, make sure it's validated. Next change, wait 5 minutes. Like, I don't think that needs to be the case. I think we could do a percent, or like sort of a rolling percentage of like, okay, we can release 10 changes at once. Each change gets a small percentage of production. We validate that percentage of production against the sort of the previous release. And if things are looking good, then that change is deemed safe and rolled out fully, right? But that doesn't have to be sequential with other changes, right? Another change could sort of grab another slice of that pie, validate its changes against the larger slice, and sort of happen, sort of in this, I don't know, like sort of parallelized manner. So I think like there's a lot of flexibility in terms of like, if you're optimizing for the speed, you start to think about like, well, the ways that we deployed websites 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 2 years ago, maybe that doesn't by default enable this sort of speed that we want. Like, what are alternatives? How can we deploy? How do we unlock those features without sacrificing, other things? So I think that's like the lens I'm coming from is less of like with the existing systems, how do we unlock it? More like we need to think from the ground up of like first principles of like how do you release changes such that you optimize for this speed. Yeah, and Scott, you talked a little bit about rollbacks. It's like I think rollback should be even faster, right? Like you should have an instant rollback. You
It
should
should
be
be
able
instant.
to
Yep.
exactly immediately switch back to your previous version, assuming you find some critical flaw. Immediate meaning like the next request goes to the previous version instead of a cooldown timer or whatever of like after like cache is clear after a certain number of time and then they get to the previous version or whatever.
Feature flags, I think, are like they like hide problems and like let them awaken at weird times is how I would think of it. Because you can like deploy your change behind a feature flag and it's like, oh, it went well. So I'm curious, like if you're doing canary or end to end, are you like enabling your feature flag when those things run and it's like isolated to that environment? Because otherwise it's just like going in and other people are pulling it in, but the feature flag's off when they run their changes, so they don't really like test the integration between your change and their change. So it's like I don't know, I feel like it's complicated.
Yeah, I think my take is that you should be sampling from the sort of the same setup. So like let's say you're doing these like I don't know 5 parallel deploys, each grabbed 2% of your production traffic to validate their changes. Like you should be taking a sample of the percentage of that feature flag rollout in those 2% slices for each of the 5 or whatever. So like it should be likely that in those little canaries that you're running in parallel, they should have the likelihood of also running into that feature flag test and validating that the changes sort of work the same way. I don't know if I'm getting my math right or whatever, but like you should have a way to like validate both the like A and B path of doing a feature flag test.
This feels like a perfect world situation because what if there's like 500 feature flags in my app? Am I just like flipping and the different combinations and testing every one of them? It feels like an impossible problem to solve.
I think it's like again, it sort of gets back to like the organizational velocity of like you should be doing everything you can to validate your assumptions as fast as possible, and like sort of with deploys and with feature flags or whatever, like you should be building systems that allow you to validate those things. So like let's say you have 500 or 1,000 feature flags at any given point in time, like you should have a system that allows you to like extrapolate those permutations and like sort of run those, even if they're like not actual real traffic, but simulated real traffic or, simulated traffic behind the scenes, like you should be able to run those permutations in parallel and like across multiple different systems or whatever. Like that should be a thing that you should it's like, again, it's like, if you start with this mindset of moving as fast as possible in the right direction, it's like, what systems do you need to build to enable that? And that should be like a thing that you think about.
I feel like if I built that system and ran it on whatever CI provider my company had, it would slowly go bankrupt. Like it sounds so expensive to run something like that.
Like I think you are like talking in a perfect world scenario, and I don't think that it's necessarily wrong, but like in like a realistic team where there's like 5 engineers and we have like this many OKRs, like it's kind of unreasonable to say like, all right, we're just going to focus in on the pipelines that are 30 minutes now and use N number of time to get it to 5 versus like, we'll try to get it faster and here's some low hanging fruit we can do. And that could be something we do at all times. While I think speed is important, like speed at all costs without like thinking through how it affects things downstream and to mask other problems, that's where I think the problem is. I think there's just generally some other mechanisms that should be introduced before we're like, our deployment speeds are 5 minutes. Like if you know, again, we are pigeonholed in a very specific example, but I kind of mean it for that. I'm talking about like these larger companies. Like I think they all should optimize their pipelines. I think they all should be trying to make it quicker. But there's also the thought too, and I know that you might not subscribe to this, but some of the most successful companies do release schedules of like twice a year. Like that's the Apple staple. And they're deploying continuously, like bug fixes, like you said. That's why like when you were like, oh, initially you were like, we're gonna deploy bug fixes and we want to unblock that to being deployed as fast as possible. Love that logic. I agree with that. If 5-minute deploys is like we can get bug fixes out in 5 minutes, but it's like, how do we make sure people aren't yeeting out brand new features that when our audience is like a middle-aged women, do they want to go from one page to the next and just the website just keeps changing? Like maybe that's an extreme example, but if hundreds of engineers at this scale can do that, it starts to introduce like things we didn't think about. Like I agree with you. We don't want to be the team blocking other teams from being successful when we're in charge of the deploy pipelines, but we also need to be like confident that those changes have value. Teams need to be talking about the value the value their changes bring and how it impacts downstream before we just unlock teams from getting things done. So I just think that there's more to the organizational velocity than just deployment speed at all costs. Like teams need to be communicating better to help what they're building drive that product. But I think like in a perfect world, if everything's in 5 minutes, like sure, like that sounds great. We got canaries really quick. We have a staging environment that we trust. Like I agree with you too. The status quo of like, well, everything's just this slow is on an unacceptable way of thinking. Like you have to push and drive these things to be better. But like, you know, sometimes maybe things shouldn't be pipelines. Maybe things could be scripts that engineers run locally so that reduces the size of things. But it also just requires a change in mindset and flow. So I'm only arguing that at some point, like making sure we almost stupid proof deploys has a little value too.
I think there's two thoughts. So getting more to like the point of like you were talking about, you know, customer reloads a page or navigates a different page and sort of sees a dramatically different experience. Part of me, this like gets back to why I sort of brought in the topic outside of just deploys, right? Why I brought up the concept of like organizational velocity, right? Like that should permeate through everything the company does, right? Meaning that the company should sort of like product decisions should be moving at that same pace and should be, you know, and the reason I use velocity instead of speed is that velocity is like speed plus direction, right? Like you should have an opinion of direction and like your organization should be aligned on that, right? So like you shouldn't result, you know, if you start with that as a first principle, you shouldn't result in n different teams each going n different directions at, you know, different speeds, right? Like you should have sort of a single team, single direction sort of perspective of like, you know, okay, we're gonna test, you know, this assumption, and like that's going to be applied universally, sort of across the org. The other thing I was thinking about is like you were talking a little bit sort of on like, you know, and again, maybe I'm like mischaracterizing what you're saying, but I think you were kind of saying like, okay, you shouldn't say like, all right, we're gonna take the sprint and just like figure out how we can make the pipeline as fast as possible. Instead, we're like, it's fine to like litter, you know, small little performance tickets or whatever, you know, like tickets that help improve the speed every so often throughout different sprints. I think that's what I'm arguing for is like, you shouldn't say like, okay, we're going to spend a month trying to speed things up and then go back to, you know, the other 11 months of the year working on product features, and then find out a year or two later, like, oh, we need to spend another month working on performance. Like, I think it should be a continuous activity that every team does, every engineer does, right? It's like, what can I pick up today or the sprint that allows us to move faster in the right direction?
I agree with all of that. I don't think like we should do one sprint 1 month or whatever. Like I don't think we should like die on this hill though. Like there are other organizational problems that get us to the organizational velocity you're trying to achieve. I think we have this narrow-minded focus on it's all about the deploys are the blocker and the problem, and that will just somehow magically relieve the rest of the organization. Like I think in your scenario, again, it's like kind of perfect world. I don't disagree with it. I think it sounds great. But if we focus on this one aspect but don't fix the other aspects, it's going to either cause more problems, and we're just kind of masking and band-aiding things that exist in the like more specific scenario I built. Like some of these other things are just really hard to achieve. Like it's hard to make remote teams that are everywhere align on the same things. It's hard to make sure that we're moving towards the same common goal based on how things are broken down. If again, like it's a very specific example, but people are deploying things there just to make sure that it works right, and that's fundamentally broken. If we stopped and built a staging environment, I think there's almost more value in that to just do that and make sure that works, or whatever, some sort of solution that allows you to have confidence before you deploy. People might not rush so much for that 5 minutes. That's not me arguing that like we shouldn't do our best to make them as fast as possible. I just think in this example, we're just saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice if deploys are so fast that like all of these other problems, we don't have to worry about them. But like with great power comes great responsibility, like Dillon kind of brought up. And it's like now we're deploying so fast that we're just like calling things done because they're deployed, and we're not picking up on some of the slack of these other problems. So like there's also the thought, also the thought of like not every single update needs to go out on its own. Some things can be batched, and I'm not like being this great advocate for deploy trains and whatnot. And there's also other mechanisms. Like I again, I'm getting very specific in the example of we deploy on main there, and basically when one person deploys, one of the problems they're trying to mask is, oh, we now have to merge in master or main, and it's like, yeah, that's like the way that's set up, but you don't have to do that. You could actually make the change. There's ways to make the change. It's like, oh, you can continuously deploy until there's a general merge conflict. So there's like other ways around these problems. And I think that gung ho it's too much. Like if it was in 5 minutes, then people wouldn't see these other symptoms. But I agree that like, again, like I'm probably repeating myself, but I agree that like we should be actively trying to make things faster. But we also should have reason, I guess, behind why we're making changes. And there is discussion to be about, should we be making major changes immediately all the time everywhere? I think it, like maybe the answer is yes, but I think there needs to be conversations. And like you said, like in this perfect structure of organizational velocity, that should already be teased out, and then the deploy shouldn't block that. Totally agree with that. But I just think that I've seen too much, like we're just band-aiding what this thing does instead of this balance between, all right, we now have confidence this thing's going to go out great, and all these other problems don't exist anymore, so I'm less worried that it goes out in 5 minutes.
All right. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's just like more so around like, is it a like, I think the way maybe the thing that we disagree on is just like how do you optimize, or how do you pick your focus point? And I think it's like maybe you're looking at it from the lens of like, like get to a good enough point and then sort of focus to something else. Whereas my perspective, maybe overly optimistic perspective, is like always have that, like always be working on that. It's like sort of focus on positive sum games of like everything should be in scope to tackle. I think we're kind of getting to the closing point here.
Would you say maybe you're Pollyannish about it?
Sure. I think we're kind of getting to our closing thoughts here. Dillon, I don't know if you had anything.
Yeah, my closing thought is that like if we're telling people to spend time thinking about optimizing the pipelines, it almost feels a little counterintuitive to tell them to go fast. If they're like spending time trying to fix pipelines, but they're supposed to be spending time making the product high quality, like where it's like tough to tell them to split their time. To me it feels like a weird paradox of like some like maybe the engineering leadership and engineering leaders and some other team should be like helping do this so that those teams can focus on the product. But that's just my take.
Operational excellence.
Because yeah,
Yeah,
if I'm
yeah,
spending 50% of my time, I'm like splitting my focus. I'm not focusing enough on the product anymore. Um, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of a negative for the company in a way.
yeah. Scott, any closing thoughts related to that or unrelated to that?
Yeah, I guess just when you're trying to do something to an extreme, try to think about like what are some smaller wins that can help alleviate this problem. I guess that's what I'm getting at. And maybe I'm taking the 5 minutes too literal, but that seemed to be like a serious benchmark in this example. And I know that there's like hundreds of other things that could add value that could be done first before that. And there are probably other ways to solve that problem or alleviate pain that are simpler. So just like try to I guess like ideally what I'm trying to say is write down what the problem is instead of immediately coming up with a solution. And try to say like what are some ways we can try to alleviate the problem we're having and look at it in more broad terms.
Yeah, I think here's my closing take is that um, the reason I push for sort of like these maybe hyper optimistic, like way too unrealistic or whatever sort of possibilities is like if teams take that and then say just become like 1% better than what they're doing, then that's already like a positive outcome. It's like sort of the common phrase of like shoot for the stars and maybe land on the moon or something, right? Like it's like sort of like if you take this as like a vision of like something that you should do or go for, then you're going to probably come out with something that's better than what you would have done without it. So yes, a lot of the things I'm pushing for is like maybe unrealistic for a lot of orgs, but it should be seen as like a motivating factor or like a sort of a thing of like, rethink those things that were holding us back to the stuff that made us move at the pace we did. Um, yeah, I think that's maybe a good place for us to end. We don't have any other special segments this week. Maybe next month or 3 months from now we'll have those queued up. Hopefully we get back into the recording life cycle. We'll see.
Quick plug for something at my work that they've been like piloting that's sort of related to this stuff. They're using a new app called DX. It's like getdx.com. I can't speak too much to like how useful it is yet, but it shows like the breakdown for every team within the software org and other parts of the company, like what their velocity is in different areas when it comes to like
That's
deployment,
cool.
PRs and stuff like that, and allows you to like see where what is the like sentiment around those things as well, because it'll like send surveys through Slack. So it's been kind of interesting to see um, how things change over time.
Is this like that? Do you remember that thing we piloted at Wayfair and then they rebranded it? It was like GitFlow or something, or it was like developer metrics
Yeah,
service.
that one felt more based on like how do I scrutinize each developer. This feels more like
Okay.
how can we find bottlenecks in the org.
Okay. I feel like that's a very tough line to balance across. Of like, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they have dashboards that are like, yeah, your engineers are doing less work than they should be, or whatever, for
Yeah,
managers
it
or
could be
something.
used for that, but I'm getting the sense that it's being used for other things, like better things, but we'll see. If people start getting let go, I'll let you know.
Yeah. All right. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with someone that you know that might also enjoy it. Leave us a like, leave us a subscribe, leave us some reviews. I don't know how many stars we have. We probably have 0 out of 5, just because no one leaves reviews. But yeah, we appreciate it. It'll keep us making content. Yeah. All right. We'll catch you next month, year.
Yeah, you never
decade.
know with this podcast.
Peace.
Later.
See ya.